My name is Richard Raymond Roumfort. I'm originally from Youngstown, Ohio, but I now live in Medina at an assisted living facility. And I'm going to tell you my story tonight. Tonight is April Fool's Day, and I'm not going to fool around with you. I'm going to tell you the truth. What I'm going to tell you tonight happened 68 years ago. And a lot of you people here weren't even born then. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the invasion of Okinawa, the last battle that the Navy had in the Pacific against the Japanese. It happened on Easter morning at 8:30 in the morning, April the 1st. I was a 20-year-old kid. Here's a picture of me when I was at battle stations. My job was, I was a fire controlman, second-class petty officer, and this is a picture of the radar or the rangefinder, a fire control rangefinder. But I was pretty young. But my station was, I pulled the trigger that fired the main battery guns. We had 5-inch mounts, twin mounts, and 3 of them. And I put a 59-pound projectile up at an air target, 6 of them every 4 seconds. And my job on the destroyer, and the destroyer was the USS Aaron Ward. It was a DM-34, as the destroyer mine layer. And tonight I'm going to tell you about my experiences as a fire controlman second class. And I'm also going to tell you some things that were classified as secret back then in 43 and 44 and 45 and 46. I joined the Navy on June the 19th in 1943 at the age of 18. I was just out of high school. And the story I'm going to tell you, you'll find that it isn't exactly the normal procedure of a fire controlman or a tin can sailor. But here's some things that I have done, and I'll cover them in my talk. I was selected to be in a movie script in September of 1943, and I was promoting the waves. They were coming in a building, and I was going out, and the caption was shown in movie theaters, and they were promoting the waves and saying that these waves were letting sailors go to sea and them. I figured out how to get out of off the base when restricted for security reasons. I showered topside while a kamikaze plane was coming in. I swam in the Panama Canal. I was on a ship that received the Presidential Unit Citation for taking 6 kamikazes and 3 bombs off Okinawa. I shot down an American plane for disobeying orders. I missed a destroyer, and it pulled out to sea without me. I was in a typhoon for 10 days in 45-foot waves, and I was in a bubble of air when I went topside. As I say, I showed you the picture of when I was 20 years old, and that's how old I was when we invaded Okinawa. I was I had received 4 promotions from the time I went into the Navy from boot camp. My boot camp, I went to Great Lakes, and the only thing I can really recall was one of the things we had to do was they had a tin building. They put a mattress in that tin building and put oil and gas in there and caught it on fire. And it was our job to go in and put that fire out with foam. And when I come out of there, I come out choking, and I couldn't see, and I thought, boy, this is terrible. I hope I don't have to do this all my life while I was in the Navy, put out fires. But I worked on the railroad, and I was a telegrapher, and I knew Morse code, and I thought, well, you know, I could go in a signal corps or something. But they said, no, we don't want you in the signal corps because you know American Morse code, and we use international Morse code. The difference is American Morse has dots and dashes and spaces. International has just dots and dashes. So it'd be more confusing to me to go into that. They're going to put me someplace else. So they said, I took a test, and I was always pretty good in math. And so they said, we're going to put you into fire control school. I thought, fire control school? That's the last thing I want to do. I don't want to put out fires. Well, I went to a fire control school in Great Lakes for 6 months. And I found out that fire control was controlling the firing of the guns. And what I was to learn was where is that target going to be when my shell gets up there? And there was a lot of math involved in it. But I graduated from the fire control school there, and the top 3 in the class went to advanced fire control school in Washington, D.C. And now there's a good liberty town, Washington. When I went there, there were 10 women for every man. And somebody else had 6 of mine because I was only dating 4 girls while I was there. I had liberty every night. The course was challenging, and I learned a lot. And I better at this time tell you a little bit about fire control, because it'll help you later on. Right here is the director, and in the director is your fire control radar, a pointer, a trainer, and a rangefinder operator, and the gunnery officer is up there. That that director is really right. Here's the bridge. This is a Aaron Ward, and that director is right over the bridge where the captain is, and that director picks up the target, sends a signal down to a computer. Now, a lot of people don't know we had a computer back in those days, but we did. And what it did was calculate the lead angle where the gun should train in order to get that shell up there when the plane was in that position. Also coming into the computer was a ship's speed and the ship's direction. Also coming in was the wind speed and wind direction. We had a stable element. Now, the stable element was nothing but a gyro. And when you tend to push a gyro, give pressure against the gyro, what happens, it pushes back. It tries to keep erect. So that signal of erecting that gyro goes back into the computer. And what that does is your guns are out here, and your ship is here, and it's rolling and pitching underneath, and the guns stay right on target. That's done by the stable element. And so the computer then calculates the lead angle and sends it out to the guns right here. It also, and puts them on target. It also sends it back, a signal back up to the director, and if it doesn't keep the director on target too, they press a button and turn the wheels and put their cross lines on target. So that correction goes back down into the computer and goes out to the guns. We can do this in less time than it takes me to tell you about it. But that kind of is the system here. Now, I was assigned to the Aaron Ward, and this is a picture of the Aaron Ward. It's pretty much camouflaged with paint, but the director is up here, and that signal, the computer room is down in here. And I was at the stable element, and that's where I fired these guns. 2 5-inch twin mounts here and a 5-inch twin mount here. And we also would put 40 millimeters on the computer to take care of the roll and pitch of the ship and so forth, sometimes, depending on the situation. When I graduated from Advanced Fire Control School in Washington, D.C., that was another 6 weeks course, or 6 months course. So I had a year of training in fire control. And I was a pretty quick learner, and I was pretty good at it. And both destroyers that I went on didn't have anybody else that graduated from that school. The Aaron Ward, there was 3 Aaron Wards. The first Aaron Ward was the DM-34, which I just showed you a picture of. That's the ship that I was on. It was a destroyer mine layer. They had an Aaron Ward, the number was 132. And it was a full 4-stacker, and it was turned over to the British in 1939, a couple years before we got even into the war. They turned over 50 destroyers to the British. And the first Aaron Ward, the 4-stacker, was beached at Normandy. They named another destroyer, the Aaron Ward, and it was number 487. And it was sunk at Guadalcanal. And of course, we were the third Aaron Ward. Now, I don't want you to be confused between the Aaron Ward and the destroyer or destroyer escort that was called the Ward. The Ward was a destroyer escort that was patrolling off Pearl Harbor on April the 1st. And it spotted a periscope following a ship into Pearl Harbor, and they had a net. And when the ships were going into the harbor, they'd open up this net so the ships could get through. And this two-man sub, Japanese sub, was following the ship to get into the harbor on the day of Pearl Harbor. And then the net would close. Well, the Ward skipper took it under fire, and he thought he knocked off the periscope. They later found out that they did sink that two-man sub, which was, and they found it off of, a little bit off of course in 2004. But anyhow, the sub was to go into the harbor, and it was there an hour before the Japanese planes hit. So really, the Ward was the first shot that was fired in World War II. And then the planes came in after that. When I got assigned to the Ward, Aaron Ward, we went down on a shakedown cruise. And the fact that I was just out of fire control school, I had all the knowledge of bore sighting the guns and lining up the directors with the guns, and that was my job. And I did it to the nth degree to be right on. And we went out on a shakedown cruise with 11 other destroyers, and we were the top gun. And simply because I had those guns lined up just right on target, you know. And I was really pleased with that. So we were top gun, and we pulled into Pearl Harbor and tied up alongside a destroyer. And it had just come back from the Pacific and had taken a bomb midship, right in the midships. And this bomb hole was probably about 20 feet by 20 feet, a big hole. But it came back to Hawaii and was going to get fixed up. And we were kidding, you know, we were young kids and cocky, and we said, what's the matter? You can't shoot those planes down before they get close enough to drop bombs on you? And all they said was, wait till you get out there, you'll see what it's like. And so we did some practices on laying mines, which I wasn't really involved with it because that wasn't part of my duties. But then we escorted some aircraft carriers to Ulithi, and we refueled off of the aircraft carriers. But we went straight to Ulithi, and we had a subcontact, and we made one run on it and dropped some depth charges. But the carriers and the destroyers have a faster speed than the subs do. So we weren't even when we could outrun the sub, and our job was to get those carriers to Ulithi, not to sink a sub. So we only made the one run on it, and we were making a straight shot of where we were going. We didn't zigzag like a convoy does. Anyhow, we got to Ulithi, and I'd never seen so many ships in my life. I says, boy, look at the ships. We're gonna go on an invasion of some sort. And sure enough, we were there a couple days, and then we set sail and we headed north. After we were underway, they didn't tell us beforehand, after we were underway, the skipper come on the air and said, we are heading for Okinawa. Okinawa? We never even heard of the island, you know. But that was one of the islands right below Japan. And we got there about March the 29th. And that was a couple days before we landed the Marines. But we went in with the mine sweepers, and they went in and brought the mines to the surface. And then we followed them, and we had to explode the mines. And when you're going at a fairly rate of speed, you got to get them at the first shot, or you don't get a second shot at them. So we put the 40 millimeters on a computer, which took care of the stable element and kept them on target. We aimed the guns right at the top of the mine, and the mines were swelling up and down like this with the waves. And we aimed it at the top, and when they came to the surface and come up and across the line of fire, we hit them and exploded them. But we were so close to the island that we could distinguish the leaves on the trees. We were in such shallow water that we scraped our sonar equipment, which is on the bottom of the ship, on the bottom of the beach that we were on. We scraped it and ruined it, so we couldn't pick up any subs. So we did 3 beaches, and then on April the 1st, Easter morning at 8:30, we went to the southern beach and landed the Marines. And after we landed the Marines, they didn't meet with much opposition on the beach, but as they progressed inland, they did. By the way, there was battleships behind us out further, and they wanted the Japanese shore batteries to open up on us when we were sweeping those mines out. And we were keeping our fingers crossed like this, hoping they wouldn't. And they didn't. But anyhow, we bombarded ahead of the Marines. As the Marines advanced, the Japanese were pretty well entrenched. So we bombarded with 5-inch shells. And we used a phosphorus shell, which is like a white burning stuff that when it hits, it burns everything it lands on. And we didn't want the shell to go and hit the ground and then burst up like this, because by the time the phosphorus would settle down, a lot of it was burned out. So we put a nose on it that was an anti-aircraft nose that it exploded when it got 50 feet from a target. So when the shell went over the 50 feet from the ground, it exploded, and all that phosphorus went down into the trenches and burn anything that was down below. And the battleships were shooting 16-inch shells. Now, a 16-inch shell is 16 inches in diameter. And they were going right over our heads with them because we were closer to the shore than they were. And I don't know whether you ever had a 16-inch shell go over you, but it sounded just like a railroad train. And it was kind of scary. Those guys had to know where they were shooting. But anyhow, we landed the troops and we bombarded ahead of them. As the troops moved forward, then we would move our bombardment a little bit forward, and they made some pretty good time. In fact, they took the airport 4 days before they had anticipated taking it. The second day, we went with some landing craft to another beach that we had demined, and the landing craft are all moving back and forth, and they're taking off the landing boats, and they're all maneuvering, and all of a sudden they all turn to the shore and start coming in. And we were simulating a second landing, but we had landed everybody on the south shore. Those boats were all empty. They got halfway back, and they turned around and come back and were loaded back on the boats, but it accomplished what we wanted. We drew some of the Japanese soldiers up to protect that second beach, and when they did, the Marines overran them, and they made pretty good progress on it. We then went to Picket Station 10, and I better tell you what picket stations are. The island of Japan is here, and Okinawa is here. And what they did, there's the island of Okinawa. They had 15 picket stations around the island, 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the radars overlapped, so nothing could come into the island without us picking it up. And picket station, we went to picket station 12, which was northwest of Okinawa, and there wasn't much activity there. And then we got to picket station 1. When we got to picket station 1, that was right between Japan and Okinawa, and we were at battle stations all night long that night. And we were to report any raids coming in. Now, what we did, back then, they didn't call you the USS Aaron Ward. We had a code word. Our code was mongoose. We were mongoose. A mongoose is a rat killer. They used to use it to kill rats in Hawaii that were eating the sugar cane. But anyhow, all night long you'd hear mongoose reporting raid 37, 4 bogies coming in at such and such an altitude. And then planes would come up from either a carrier or a base and intercept the planes and shoot them down. And most of this is at night, and shoot them down. We only wanted to shoot down, we only fired at some of the planes. Well, we tracked them all, but we only fired at some of the planes when we thought they had spotted us. And I'm not positive, but I think we got shot down about 2 that night. But we were at battle stations all night, and in the morning at 8 o'clock, we had shot up a little more than of our ammunition that we wanted, so we had to come back and take more ammunition on. So we were replaced by another destroyer. So as we were tied up alongside this ammunition ship at Okinawa, we heard on the radio Tokyo Rose. Tokyo Rose knew more about what was going on in the war than our generals did, and they'd tell us. And she came on the air and she says, "We are happy to announce that we have just sunk Mongoose." Funny feeling goes over you when someone says they just sunk your ship. They did sink a destroyer. They sunk the destroyer that relieved us. Anyhow, we took on ammunition and we picked up some survivors from the Pinckney, a ship that was sunk there, about 12 of them. And then on April the 10th, they sent us to Saipan and Guam to fix our sonar equipment. Because without the sonar equipment, you couldn't pick up a sub. So we get that fixed up. And then we came back to Okinawa and went to Picket Station 10. And we were there on May the 3rd, 1943. And there was an island off of China. Picket Station 10 was southwest of Okinawa. There was an island off of China, and we thought there was maybe a beam that was beaming Japanese planes in on Okinawa, because every night a lot of planes would come in. And they were out of our range, but not out of our radar range. So we would report them, but we couldn't fire at them. So our skipper asked to move our picket station over a few miles, and we got permission to do that. And the next 4 days, the weather was bad, and they didn't have hardly any planes in the air at all. But the fourth day, May the 3rd, there was about somewhere between 45 and 50 enemy Japanese planes coming in on that beam. And we had an air coverage of 4 F-4U Corsairs. And so we send the 4 Corsairs out to meet these 50 enemy planes. And for some reason, they were at a different altitude than the planes, and they missed them. So by the time they would turn around, the Corsairs would turn around, the Japanese planes would be on us. So we didn't want to have 4 of our planes up there with 50 enemy planes and have to distinguish, is that ours or is that theirs, you know. So we instructed our planes to stay outside the 9-mile radius, that we were going to open up on anything that came in. So anyhow, I was pulling the trigger on the main battery guns, and we had taken under fire 2 Bettys that were coming in. Now Bettys, they were 2-man bombers, and they were even using bombers for suicide planes. Then they were desperate, and we took them under fire, and I knocked the wing off the one. But they were coming in side by side, and here comes this F-4U Corsair down, and he gets behind both of them. He gives this one a shot, and this one a shot, and this one a shot. I knocked I downed the one Betty. I might just inject, if the name of the plane was a woman, like Betty, they were bombers. If they were Zeke or Val, or they were fighters. So anyhow, I downed this one, and the other one veered off. It was smoking, and the the F-4U Corsair veered out after him, and he finished him off. I think he got credit for the kill, but he was smoking. He was going through the same flak I was putting up for the Bettys, and I think I got one of his oil lines. Anyhow, he gained altitude and bailed out, and he was picked up by another ship of ours. But I always get accused of shooting down one of our own planes. And when I was going to church on Sunday, our minister would say, like on Veterans Day, and he'd say, "Will all the veterans stand and be recognized?" You know, and a lot of them standing. So I stand up, you know, and he says, "Roumfort," he says, "I hear you shot down an F-4U Corsair." And I say, "Yeah." He says, "You know, that was one of our planes." He never said about the 13 enemy planes I shot down, just that F-4U Corsair I got credit for. Anyhow, we got hit pretty bad. In fact, here's a picture of the ship. If you notice, let's see, this is the starboard side. We were listing to the starboard side. You notice the oil slick? We were 4 inches out of the water. They flooded the forward fire room, after engine room, my living compartment, and we were flooding our magazines because when they were hitting us, the gasoline would go all over the deck and catch everything on fire. And if you notice, from number 1 stack aft, we were just scrap. I don't know whether you can see it or not, but right here is the propeller of a plane that went into the bulkhead, and the motor of the plane went underneath this gun mount 3, and it couldn't train. And the gunnery officer was in communication with me, and he says, "We can't train our guns. What do I do?" I says, "Keep loading them and elevate to 45 degrees. I'm going to keep firing." He could elevate, but he couldn't train. And at least he knew the enemy knew that the gun was working, you know. And but all this was all just scrap, and 6 kamikazes hit us from number 1 stack aft, and we lost a third of our crew, either to death or wounded. And we carried our crew to the officers' mess hall. We had 1 officer and 2 corpsmen, and they were operating on the people that were wounded. And after they thought they had sunk us, the planes took off. The rest of the planes took off for Okinawa, and we were dead in the water. But what our problem was, one of the first kamikazes that hit us knocked our steering out. So we were going around in circles, and that's not good. You need to coordinate your direction of you're going to the direction the planes are coming in. If you got a ship right here, a plane likes to come in and drop his bomb this way so that he could have a better chance of hitting it. We like to turn the ship this way when the plane is coming in here, and that means that we can train our forward guns and after guns on that and get more guns on him. If he's coming in forward, only the forward guns can get him. If he's coming in aft, just the after guns. So it's advantageous for us to turn the ship. If you can't turn the ship, you're in bad shape. So they pounded the hell out of us, to be honest with you. And we took, the 6 kamikazes hit us, and 3 bombs. And this is a damage of what was done here. This is where the stack, number 2 stack was. That's the base of it. And you can see the quad 40s back here all twisted up, and this is the top of number 1 stack. But you can see here's where our ship or boat was to get ashore, and it's just disintegrated. This deck here moved. A bomb hit in here and moved the side of the ship away from the deck, and that's when all the water came into the fire rooms. This is the port side, and you can see we're out of the water. You can see how calm the water was. If we'd have had a wave, we'd have been sunk. But it was calm like this. So we went through that and got tied. The USS Shannon, DM-25, came alongside and tied a line to us and pulled us into Crimeritto Bay. And you can see, this is where our boat was, and this is where the deck was, the side of the ship was bombed away from the deck, and you can see how badly all this was. This was all on fire and burning and exploding ammunition, and we were trying to even flooding the magazine. So we let some of our wounded adrift on rafts that were still floatable, because we only had 3 people that could operate on the men. I was, after the planes left, they left thinking that we were done, and I left my position at firing the guns and went topside and helped carry the wounded into the officers' quarters. And there was a little ship that pulled alongside, and I think we put 3 men out there that was badly wounded. And I insisted on, if I carried the stretcher, I didn't want to be in the back. I wanted to be in the front. Because if you're looking over those men that were wounded, and some of them had their jaws off and arms off, and it made you sick. And but we were towed into Crimeritto Bay by the Shannon, and we were tied up alongside a repair ship. And they wouldn't allow anybody from the repair ship on our ship because they thought that the extra weight would sink us. And if a repairman come on, a man had to go off. And anyhow, this repair ship was tied up pretty close to the shoreline, because in Crimeritto Bay, there was a lot of ships in there, and they lay down a smoke screen at night because that's when the kamikazes came in. And the kamikazes would come in, scoot over the water and trying to hit a ship. But they could see the island, and we were tied up close to the island. And when they saw the island land, they would come up to miss the land. And when they came up, they went right over us. And but the only bad thing about that was we were so close to the shore that there were some Japanese that were hiding in caves and so forth on the island, and they would swim out, and we call them suicide swimmers. And the suicide swimmers would swim out, climb up your anchor chain, and knife the sailors as they slept. So we had to put guards on the ship, midships and fore things. Anyhow, we got fixed up well enough to come home. We only had one screw. You have a fire room and an engine room, and it operates one screw. And you have two of them, so you have two screws. Normally we could do about 34 knots with both screws. We couldn't get they couldn't get the one engine room working, and we come back on one screw. We could do 19 knots. We left Camaretto Bay on June the 6th. So that meant we were alongside that repair ship for over a month, fitting the ship well enough to make it back to the States. 12,000 miles we brought that ship back. We're halfway back, and around Anahuac, and a submarine, the Japanese submarine, sunk a ship north of us about 50 miles. And we could have gotten there in a couple hours, but our skipper asked permission to go up and pick up survivors. And we couldn't fire a gun, we couldn't fire a depth charge, and nothing. And we were denied permission. They sent another destroyer over to pick up the survivors. We got to the West Coast, and all the dry docks were filled. So they sent us down through the Panama Canal to Brooklyn Navy Yard. And going through the Panama Canal, I'd explain a little bit about the Panama Canal. Was not what I imagined it to be. The Panama Canal, if you were going from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, you know what direction you'd be going? You would be going northwest. At both ends, at the Atlantic and the Pacific, are three locks that raises the ship up to a lake. And this lake is not a round lake. It was sort of like more of a river. And the way you navigated that river is on the shoreline. You'd have three posts like this, and or lights. And when they lined up like this, you went straight for them, and you went on that course until three on this side lined up, and then you'd change course and go there. So you knew where the deep part of the lake was, and you could navigate that lake. And the problem with it, the slow part, was going into the locks and getting raised up to that level of the lake and then back down. And so carriers had the first crack at going through the locks, then battleships, then cruisers, and destroyers were the last. They're a smaller ship. So we had a 2-hour wait to go through the locks on the Panama Canal. So our skipper says, how'd you like to go on a dip over the side? And we thought that was a pretty good idea. Our skipper was in his early 30s. I was 20. And but I had my swimsuit at the bottom of my sea bag because I was expecting to get liberty when I got to Brooklyn Navy Yard. So I didn't want to go all the way down to my bottom of my sea bag. So my buddy, who was 100 pounds heavier than I was, said, use my suit. It's on my bunk. So I put a suit on and it was really loose. So I tied it with a rope and I dove in off of where gun mount 42 was, aft. Dove into the water. Man, I thought I'd never stop going down. I get down there and I lose the suit and it wrapped around my ankles. Now, did you ever be underwater and try to get to the surface? You got to kick. I couldn't kick because of that suit being wrapped around my ankles. I didn't want to kick it off because then when I got to the surface, it wasn't my suit to begin with, and I had to still get back onto the ship. So I finally got to the surface. And when I got to the surface, I reached down and I pulled up the suit and climbed up the ladder. And from then on, when I dove off, I went feet first. I didn't go head first. And but I think I was the only one, as far as I know, that ever skinny dipped in the Panama Canal. Anyhow, we got to Brooklyn Navy Yard and in August, mid-August, and that was about the time the war ended. The Japanese surrendered. And so they sold the USS Aaron Ward, a $6 million ship, to the New Jersey scrapyard for $37,000. That's the way the government works. And anyhow, I went on leave and reported a week's leave, and I was to report to Cleveland. I lived in Youngstown. That's 60 miles away. And I thought, oh boy, this is pretty good. I can get home on the weekends, you know, and there's no base up in Cleveland, so they were living in hotels, you know, Life of Riley. And so I went on a week's leave and then reported to Cleveland. And when I reported to Cleveland, it only took them 4 hours to send me on to Norfolk by train. And I took a train to Norfolk to catch the USS Turner that was going back to Japan. I had a layover in Washington, D.C. So when I got to Washington, I called an old girlfriend that lived in Silver Springs, Maryland, and I said, I got a couple hours layover in Washington. I'm down at the depot. You want to come down and we'll go out to eat and talk about old times, you know. Oh, yeah. So she came down and we went out and ate. And I looked at my watch and the time got away from us. And I said, oh, my goodness, we better get back to the depot because I don't want to miss my train. Well, we got back to the depot in Washington, D.C., just in time to see the train going down the track. I missed the train. So I stayed at the depot until the next train went to Norfolk. And when I got to Norfolk, I says, Rick Roumfort, Fire Controlman, second class, reporting for duty on the USS Turner. USS Turner pulled out about an hour ago. It's on its way to New Orleans. And so the next day I go to New Orleans and with a draft of 10 men I had with me. They were coming out of sick bay or from leave, and I hadn't been paid for a long time, and I spent most of my money in Washington, at the restaurant, and so I had the most money, 83 cents I had. So anyhow, the ship didn't pull into New Orleans. It pulled into Lake Charles, Louisiana. So on to the next day to Lake Charles, Louisiana. Get there at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't know where the ship was, and that's as far as the transportation we had, you know. So I reached in, pulled my 83 cents out, and I dialed the telephone operator, told her I wanted to talk to a captain of the fellow on one ship that was in there. She says, well, there's 2 ships here, a submarine and another ship. I said, I want to talk to the captain of the deck of the other ship. So I waited, and finally they come on the thing, and I told them I was reporting for duty, and I had 10 men here, and we had no money, and we couldn't get cabs. We didn't know where the ship was. Can you get us some transportation? So he says, well, there's an air base about 12 miles north of here. I'll see if I can get a couple trucks down there for you. He says, you call me back in 20 minutes. I says, no, you call me back. I didn't want to lose my dime or whatever it cost, you know. And so anyhow, I says, and I gave him the phone number. I said, I'll be right here. So he called and said they had a couple trucks coming. So I did. We got in the truck, and they took us to the Turner. And the Turner was a destroyer, but it had tubes on it, torpedo tubes on it. And I caught the Turner there. And when I got aboard the Turner, the guy in charge says, where have you been? And I thought, I'm in trouble now. And I said, I got 10 men here. They've been awake all night. And I says, it's 4 o'clock. Can you bunk them out at least till 6 o'clock till Reveille, so they get a couple hours sleep? Okay, so he did that. The next morning I found out why he was so concerned that I wasn't there. In the F Division, you have a chief petty officer, a first-class petty officer, 2 second-class petty officers, 4 third-class petty officers, and the rest are seamen. Get on board the Turner, no chief, no first class, no second class. I'm going on as the only second-class petty officer. He had 6 third-class petty officers. And I'm going on in charge of the whole F Division at 20 years old. And we're heading out for Japan. And we go through the canal again and over through Hawaii and over to Kobe, Japan. And some of us made liberties in different towns there. And but I used to like to go on the shore patrol because I had a .45 on my waist, and I felt a little more safer. And they had restrictions on where you could go. So as a shore patrolman, I went to the places we couldn't go to make sure there was nobody else there. And they did restrictions because a couple of chief petty officers were poisoned at some of the restaurants. So only certain restaurants were approved. So anyhow, I came back. My points came up over there, and I took a subtender back to the States to be discharged. And when I got back to the States, here the Turner was in there. It had had a change of orders and come back from Japan, and it beat me back Well, that subtender I think could only do 9 or 10 knots, and the Turner could do 34. You know. So I got back to the States and was discharged. I'll tell you, this is a letter that's a Christmas letter. The skipper sent each one of the members of the Aaron Ward a letter like this. Look at the size of this. All year long, this skipper, everybody loved him. Guys would die for him, and some guys did die for him. But you'd go up on the bridge, and he always had this hat on, and he had this pipe in his mouth. And when you come out on the bridge, he'd take that pipe out of his mouth, put it on the rim of his hat. Hi. He'd acknowledge you before you could even salute him, you know. But he was a good guy. He was only in his mid-30s, but we all loved him. And everybody, when they salvaged or they scrapped the ship, wrote to him. And he became a rear admiral. He stayed in the service and became a rear admiral. And everybody wrote to him. And every Christmas, he'd send out this letter. And it had pictures of stuff here. And it listed everybody here and where they were and what they were doing. So-and-so went to college. So-and-so got married. Another guy got killed with a hunting accident. A couple guys went to the Bay of Pigs. And he kept us alert of what the whole crew was doing. And he did this until he died. And then a gunner's mate took over and started doing it. But here, we got back in 46, and he's still writing a letter in 2007. He was paying for this postage all the time, you know. But we loved this guy, and we'd have done anything for him. This is the picture of the Turner. You can see the fire control director up here and the guns. The ship was the same class ship, except that this had torpedo tubes on and we had mines. But we all loved this guy, and we were all together for 11 months on this ship. And we were a family. And it was an experience serving under this guy here. But I met my wife. I didn't know my wife when I came home. I met my wife after I came home. I was 21 years old. She was 17. And we didn't get married until 1950. But I wanted to leave you with some statistics of the war, because you don't realize how bad this was. In World War II, there were 16.5 million in the service for the United States. There were 300,000 killed, servicemen and women killed in that war. There were 672,000 wounded in that war. There were 50 countries involved, and overall, the whole war cost 30 million in casualties, fighting men, and 46 million civilians. We were lucky that they did get to the United States. Most of that was in Europe, the civilians, 46 million. We had 313 ships sunk, 70 of them were destroyers and 51 were submarines. At Okinawa, in 3 months, the Navy lost 34 ships sunk, 368 ships damaged. We were listed as damaged. We had 4,900 sailors killed, 4,800 wounded. The Japs, from April the 6th, when I left Okinawa, to June the 22nd, they lost 1,465 kamikazes and 1,351 other planes. The casualties were high. You know, they say freedom is great to have, but freedom isn't free. A lot of men paid for it, and I was one of the lucky ones. I come back without a scratch.